The lawyer slid the property deed across his polished mahogany desk, his expression edged with discomfort. "I'm afraid this is all that remains of your grandfather's estate, Miss Carter." The medical expenses consumed everything else. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses as if reluctant to meet my gaze. "The property taxes are covered through the end of the year, but beyond that, well, the cabin itself holds little market value." I stared at the yellowed document, watching dust motes swirl in the golden afternoon light filtering through the Venetian blinds. Grandfather James had always been a mystery, a wanderer who appeared without warning, bearing strange gifts from distant places only to vanish again with vague mentions of research. His final return, forced by illness, had done little to unravel his secrets. Even as pancreatic cancer wasted him away, he spent his final months locked away in his study, emerging only for doctor visits and cryptic, fragmented conversations. "There's also this," the lawyer added, placing an old brass key beside the deed. The key was heavy in an unnatural way, its surface etched with swirling patterns of vines and celestial symbols. Tarnished with age, it looked as though it belonged to another century, perhaps even another world. "Your grandfather was insistent that you receive this personally," the lawyer continued. "He said, and I quote, 'When the time comes, she'll understand.' He made a point of it." I ran my fingers over the cool metal, tracing the intricate design. "Did he ever mention what it unlocks?" The lawyer shook his head. "Not a word. James was eccentric, to say the least. The few times I met with him, he seemed far more interested in discussing planetary alignments than legal affairs." He closed the folder on his desk with a definitive thud. "I'm sorry there wasn't more, given your circumstances." "My circumstances." A delicate way of referring to my divorce, the exhausting custody battle, and the barely surviving freelance business that barely kept us afloat. At 36, this wasn't the life I'd envisioned. Single, financially strained, navigating a shared custody arrangement with an ex-husband who had decided family life stifled his creative freedom. Still, I forced a smile. "Thank you. My grandfather was always unconventional. I didn't expect much." But that wasn't entirely true. I hadn't expected wealth, but I had hoped for something, an explanation maybe, or at least a clearer picture of the man who had flitted in and out of my life like a shadow. 2 weeks later, I loaded up my car, strapped my 9-year-old daughter Lily into the passenger seat, and made the 3-hour drive from Portland to the remote woodland property near Mount Hood. The road turned rough as we neared our destination, the trees closing in like silent sentinels. Then, as we crested the final bend, the cabin came into view. It was smaller than I remembered, and in worse shape. The roof sagged on one side, the once blue paint had faded to a ghostly gray, peeling in ragged strips to reveal weathered logs beneath. The porch leaned precariously, and an old shed stood to one side, its door barely clinging to a single rusted hinge. "Mom, it looks like a witch's house," Lily gasped, eyes wide with delight. "Can we keep it? Please say we're keeping it." I hesitated, taking in the dilapidated state of the place. "It needs work," I admitted. "But it's ours now. We'll see what we can do with it." A real estate agent in Portland had been blunt. "The land has some value, but the structure, you'd be better off tearing it down." But I couldn't bring myself to discard this last piece of my grandfather without at least stepping inside. The interior was surprisingly intact, dusty but undisturbed. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by built-in shelves filled with time-worn books. A small kitchen stood in one corner, its appliances relics from another era. The loft above, reachable by a narrow ladder, held a single bed and a trunk of old linens. A second, smaller bedroom tucked behind the kitchen completed the modest layout. "It smells like Grandpa," Lily murmured, running her fingers along the spines of the books. "Like that special tea he used to drink." She was right. The air carried the same scent I remembered from my childhood. Earthy, laced with spices I could never quite identify. The familiarity of it tightened something in my chest. That weekend, we simply explored. The well still pumped water. The old wiring miraculously held up, and though there was no internet or reliable cell service, Lily quickly forgot her initial complaints when she found a trunk of board games in the loft. By Sunday evening, as we prepared to leave, I made a decision. "What would you think about spending the summer here?" I asked, watching her sift through an old puzzle box. "I can work remotely, and we could fix it up a bit. Lily's face lit up. Really? We can stay. Her enthusiasm sealed it. The cabin offered something we both needed: space to heal, to breathe, and maybe, just maybe, to finally understand my grandfather's secrets. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a routine of slow restoration. I patched the roof, repaired the porch, and scrubbed years of dust and grime from the wooden floors. Lily, ever the adventurer, took it upon herself to document everything in a notebook she titled The Mystery of Grandpa's Cabin. One sweltering Saturday in late June, she made a discovery that would change everything. "Mom," she called from the fireplace, her hands blackened with soot. "There's a loose stone here." I crouched beside her as she wiggled the small stone free, revealing a narrow cavity behind it. "What do you think is inside?" she whispered. "Probably just an old hiding spot," I mused, peering into the darkness. People used to stash valuables in fireplaces before banks were common. We found nothing that day, but the discovery ignited a deeper curiosity. Over the following weeks, we uncovered more hidden compartments: behind a loose board in the loft, beneath a warped floorboard, inside a false bottom drawer in the kitchen. Most were empty, but some held artifacts that defied explanation. A compass etched with unfamiliar markings, a bundle of brittle letters in a language I didn't recognize, a small leather-bound notebook filled with pages of coded symbols and cryptic notes. And then, one evening, as the sun bled gold through the trees, Lily found something else. A hidden door. Half buried beneath the cabin's foundation, concealed behind decades of overgrown ivy and decayed wood, it was barely visible. But there was no mistaking it. And as I traced the edge of the lock, my breath caught. The intricate pattern on the key my grandfather left me matched it exactly. "When the time comes, you'll understand," he had said. My fingers trembled as I lifted the key, fitting it into place. With a soft, echoing click, the door creaked open, and our lives were never the same again. As we continued restoring the cabin, we uncovered more peculiarities: strange symbols carved into the wooden beams overhead, intricate patterns in the floorboards that only became visible when the afternoon sun struck them at just the right angle, and shelves lined with books written in languages neither of us recognized. Some volumes focused on geology, others on astronomy, and many contained hand-drawn maps marked with symbols identical to those on my grandfather's brass key. Grandpa James was definitely unconventional, I murmured one evening, sifting through a drawer filled with odd trinkets, compasses, empty vials, and astronomical charts so detailed they looked like they belonged in an observatory. "I think he was cool," Lily countered, slipping on a peculiar pair of spectacles with tinted lenses. She twirled in place, then gasped. "Whoa, these make everything look purple. And look, some things glow." She pointed at a rock specimen on the shelf, and sure enough, through the strange lenses, it emitted a faint, eerie luminescence. By July, the cabin had transformed. The once dilapidated structure now stood sturdy and inviting, painted deep forest green, with fresh porch steps and a cozy interior filled with thrifted furniture and warm touches. My work had slowed slightly, but a new client, a scientific publishing house in need of technical illustrations, provided a steady income. Our days found a rhythm. Mornings were spent on work and lessons. I had decided to homeschool Lily part-time for the summer, using my grandfather's extensive library as our curriculum. Afternoons were for adventure, hiking through the dense forest, swimming in a hidden lake a half-mile from the cabin, or continuing our investigation of the property's many mysteries. Then, one fateful afternoon, everything changed. I was repainting the kitchen cabinets when Lily's excited voice rang out from the basement, sharp with urgency. Mom, I found something weird." Dropping my brush, I rushed down the narrow wooden steps, the air growing cool and damp as I entered the small, earthen-floored space. Lily stood in front of the stone wall at the back of the basement, her hands smudged with dust and excitement blazing in her hazel eyes. "I was bouncing my ball, and it hit right here," she explained, tapping a spot in the masonry. It sounded hollow. I pressed my hand against the wall, running my fingers along the surface until I, too, felt the subtle seam. A thrill of possibility ran through me. It could just be a secret door. Lily interrupted, practically vibrating with excitement. "Like in my books. We have to open it." For nearly an hour, we searched for a mechanism, pressing every stone, testing every possible trigger. Just as I was about to suggest taking a break, Lily grabbed my arm, her expression alight with realization. The key, Mom, the one Grandpa left you. My breath caught. The brass key, the one I had absent-mindedly tucked into my handbag, had seemed like little more than a sentimental heirloom. But now, I retrieved it and held it in my palm, its weight suddenly significant. Lily pointed to a small discolored section of mortar near the floor. There's something there. Look closely. She was right. Nearly imperceptible in the dim basement light was a keyhole, cleverly disguised within the rough texture of the wall. With trembling fingers, I inserted the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, resonant click, ancient gears ground to life. A section of the stone wall swung inward, revealing a dark passageway. I switched on my phone's flashlight, the beam illuminating a short, narrow corridor carved into the bedrock beneath the cabin. The air smelled different, older, untouched. A thrill of apprehension and exhilaration coursed through me. "Stay behind me, Lily," I murmured. "No way," she whispered, clutching my hand tightly. "We're doing this together." The corridor stretched for about 10 feet before opening into a chamber, circular, carved entirely from stone. As we stepped inside, soft overhead lights flickered on, revealing a space that took my breath away. In the center stood a massive stone table, its surface covered in neatly arranged documents, maps, and what appeared to be scientific instruments. The walls were lined with shelves brimming with leather-bound journals, wooden chests, and artifacts that looked like they belonged in a museum. Against one wall, a strange device resembling an antique telescope was mounted, aimed at a narrow opening in the ceiling, an observatory of sorts. Cabinets with glass fronts displayed rock specimens labeled in my grandfather's meticulous handwriting. A series of old-fashioned drawers held rolled-up maps, some so ancient their edges had frayed to near dust. Lily spun in a slow circle, taking it all in. "Mom," she whispered in awe, "what is this place?" "I don't know," I admitted, pulling a journal from one of the shelves. It was filled with my grandfather's crisp handwriting, accompanied by precise sketches of celestial bodies, mathematical equations, and maps. So many maps, each marked with symbols that now felt eerily familiar. A folded document slipped from between the pages, landing on the stone table. My stomach tightened as I unfolded it. It was a deed, similar to the one for the cabin, but far older, written on parchment rather than modern paper. My breath caught in my throat. "What is it?" Lily asked. I scanned the document, my heart pounding. It's a mining claim," I murmured. "From 1887. For a gold mine in the Cascade Mountains. And according to this addendum, it's still valid." Lily's eyes widened. "Wait, Grandpa left us a gold mine." I looked up from the parchment, my pulse hammering. Apparently, yes. But the mine was only part of the secret. As we pored over my grandfather's journals, the full picture began to emerge. He hadn't been just an eccentric scientist, he had been a visionary, a self-taught geologist and astronomer who had spent decades developing sustainable, environmentally conscious methods of mineral extraction. He had discovered a way to mine gold without the devastating environmental consequences, techniques that could have revolutionized the industry. "Listen to this," I said, reading aloud from a journal entry dated 1982. "Conventional mining would destroy this land, leaving only ruin. The methods I've developed could change everything, but they threaten too many powerful interests. It's safer to wait, to pass this knowledge on when the time is right." Lily leaned over the journal, her expression fierce with determination. "Mom, this isn't just a treasure map. It's bigger than that. Grandpa left us a way to fix things." I exhaled, the weight of our discovery settling in my bones. "Yes," I murmured. "And now we have to decide what to do with it." That night, we slept in the cabin with a new awareness of what lay beneath our feet. The next morning, I made my first calls to attorneys who specialize in mineral rights and intellectual property. Over the following weeks, we carefully cataloged my grandfather's research, digitizing his notes and trying to comprehend the full scale of what he had left behind. By summer's end, we had made our decision. Instead of selling his work to the highest bidder, we would honor his legacy. We would create something lasting, something that would change the way the world viewed resource extraction. And so the James Carter Foundation for Sustainable Resource Management was born. What had begun as an inheritance of a crumbling cabin and a mysterious key had become something far greater. a legacy of knowledge, innovation, and hope for the future. And it was only the beginning. A year after discovering the hidden chamber, I stood at the entrance of what was once an abandoned mine, now a demonstration site for sustainable resource extraction. Lily, wearing her oversized safety helmet and the strange tinted spectacles we'd found months ago, nudged me. "Do you think Grandpa James would be proud?" she asked. I glanced at the team of geologists and engineers setting up their equipment, all marveling at how accurate my grandfather's predictions had been. His revolutionary techniques were finally being put into practice, not just for profit, but to teach a better way forward. "I think this is exactly what he wanted," I said, squeezing her hand. "Then we better not mess it up," she grinned. Life had transformed since that summer. The cabin was no longer just a home. It had become a research hub. My design work now focused on environmental communication, while Lily, once a quiet bookworm, had blossomed into a budding scientist. Even my ex-husband, once skeptical, had started bringing her here on weekends, admitting, begrudgingly, that it was educational. But the biggest change had been within me. I was no longer just surviving. I had a purpose. My grandfather's secrecy, once frustrating, now made sense. He had been protecting his work until the right moment, until I was ready. That evening, as Lily and I sat on the cabin's porch, watching the stars emerge, she leaned against me. "You figured it out, Mom," she said. "That's why Grandpa trusted you." I touched the brass key hanging around my neck, a symbol of the past unlocking the future. The real inheritance hadn't been gold. It had been the chance to build something lasting, something that mattered. And sometimes, the greatest treasures aren't buried in the earth, but in the choices we make when we finally discover them.